All right, and here to give us the inside scoop on what to expect from the Virginia Cavaliers, we've got Brad Franklin from Cavs Corner. Brad, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks. Glad to be here, man. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thanks. So last year, UConn and UVA played in Connecticut. This year, the Huskies will be making the return trip. Uh, UConn won in maybe not the most exciting game in college football history, 13-10. Um, what are the changes that the team has undergone between that kind of first and second season under Bronco Mendenhall?
Well, I think the biggest change is probably just in terms of one, they added a lot of depth, both in terms of adding a few grad transfers on the offensive line, as well as bringing in a pretty heavy recruiting class. It wasn't a class full of five-star players. There's not an Andrew Brown or Quinn Blanding in the bunch, but there are a lot of guys who Bronco Mendenhall and his staff really thought could contribute early. And I think the big, probably beyond that, is just like when you go from year one to year two, I think everybody, most programs in that situation, you guys are going to be more comfortable in the schemes, but they're also going to be more comfortable in what the program asks of them everywhere else. And I think strength and conditioning was a big point of emphasis for Virginia in the offseason. When you looked at some of the numbers and compared them, year to year, you've got some guys adding as much as 60 pounds.
Oh, wow.
When Frank Wintrick arrived, he's Virginia's director of performance. What they wanted to do was essentially get kids ready for the type of practice that Bronco wanted to run, and so they went after endurance more than they went after size. And there were a lot of games last year where Virginia was just pushed around, and so in the offseason, the next step was to add that. I think one of the things that's been interesting has been it is a faster team as well. It's not just you're talking about guys who are bigger and stronger, but they're also faster. And I know that's a very cliche thing to, when we talk to, coaches and players in the preseason, bigger, faster, stronger. But realistically, the way Virginia does its tiered approach with its performance staff and the way that they train the kids, everything is really incremental and everything is really combined. So there is a cohesion between the strength and conditioning as well as the speed training. So I think Virginia's a bigger team. They are a faster team. They're still thin in some spots, but their depth is better. And they did keep all of the same coaches across the line from Broncos first staff. But overall, I think it's just a more experienced team and certainly a more experienced program in year two.
And what has been the perception or feeling about Bronco Mendenhall, let's just say after that first season? What was kind of the off-season discussion around, where he has the team? Where was that?
Well, I think the problem that Bronco ran into was that he came from BYU with sort of the mantra of, or maybe not mantra is not the right word, sort of the ethos of a successful coach who could get them pointed in the right direction. And I think he probably didn't help himself in the months leading up to the start of the season, where he would talk to, whether it was alumni events or even I think there was a basketball game where he was introduced at one point. He had never had a season as a head coach where he didn't go to a bowl game. And so he sort of would talk about that a little bit. And I don't think that he set the expectations too high. I think that he set any expectations. And realistically, as he went through last season, I think he became acutely aware, especially after their opener, maybe the first few games of the season, that it was going to be a much bigger rebuild job. And he admitted after the season, when we sat down with him as a kind of a media horde, we were in his office and it was like maybe 8 or 12 of us. And he admitted, he's like, I coached BYU year 12 and not UVA year 1. So I think the fans were extremely let down because I think they were thinking that maybe they were hoping that he would, be able to turn things around pretty quickly, and that just didn't happen. And then last season in and of itself was really brutal, not just the record, but the way it ended. They haven't beaten Virginia Tech since Reagan was in office. It's not technically that long, but it feels like it. And so they went to Blacksburg and did this weird quarterback rotation thing where they almost changed quarterbacks on every play. And it was just really, not only did they get smacked by their biggest rival again, but they also did it in a really humiliating kind of fashion. So I think the offseason, fans, I don't think fans have checked out on him at all, but I do think that they're very much weary, and they're very much looking forward for some kind of positive result this year to sort of grapple onto. I think even in the opener, there's still a lot of skepticism among the fans because they're just sort of tired of losing and they're tired of getting their hopes up only to have them kind of crash down around them. The loss to Indiana certainly didn't help that because for a lot of folks that was a kind of a show me game. It was an opportunity for them to play against another Power 5 team, another team sort of in a similar position as them, and they just really kind of did not execute, especially offensively and on special teams. So I think overall, I would say the vast majority of the fan base is still waiting for some results before they can get excited. And I think you do have some that are sort of openly talking about whether or not this is going to work. But I think you also have a large contingent that's also, really likes what Bronco brings to the table, really likes the way that he's, what he's done so far and how he's sort of approached things, especially in light of the events in Charlottesville in August. I think that was a significant sort of rallying cry for not just the city of Charlottesville, but also for this team as a whole. I think their show of unity and the way that they responded in light of the chaos and the events of August 12th really sort of, I think, endeared them to not only the community, but also, the greater university community and the fan base even more. So I feel like that is a step in the right direction. I think folks really like Bronco as a coach. They're just kind of still a little skeptical that some of these things are going to work out on the field and success is going to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Indiana is definitely a quality opponent. Definitely, maybe historically not so much, but they had shown Ohio State, challenged Ohio State pretty nicely in their opening game, and came into Charlottesville as a pretty solid team. So let's talk a little bit more about that game against Indiana. You had the solid open to the season against William and Mary, and then 34-10 to loss to Indiana. So what went wrong in that Indiana game that maybe did not reveal itself as a weakness or area of poor performance in the first game of the season?
Well, I think anytime Virginia has a game where the quarterback attempts 66 passes, something went awry. And I think the problem there is that Virginia only had between its starting two running backs only had 16 carries. In order for the Cavaliers to be successful, they have to be balanced offensively, and I think they have to sustain drives. And I think of their I forget the number off the top of my head. I think it was 7 of their 16 drives were 3 and outs. So even though the defense I think was playing really well, they really took Indiana out of what the Hoosiers wanted to do. And Tim Harris, their Virginia starting cornerback, who got hurt in camp early last year, hurt his shoulder, was really never himself in the first game and decided to shut it down, take a redshirt year, and come back. He breaks his wrist in the opener, and so Bronco was stuck with either roll with a true freshman at cornerback or move his safety, who he had literally just moved back from cornerback back to cornerback. And so he did, and the defense was just lights out for a while. And so Richard Lago, who was Indiana's starting quarterback, he goes out. They bring in the running quarterback, and it took Virginia a little bit of time to adjust to having the different sort of offense. He was a smaller, kind of speedier little guy. And I thought that once they got themselves straight after halftime, I thought the defense still was really good. The offense just did not sustain drives. They couldn't hit anything downfield. Everything, Ben Kirk was having a real problem with the deep ball. Everything was going out of bounds. Wasn't giving his guys a real chance. So between the offense not being able to sustain drives and special teams really let them down. There were a lot of short fields, a lot of situations where I think guys were either just gassed from having played against the tempo, or maybe they were just guys not in the right role. So I do think that one thing that kind of presented itself last week that wasn't there in the William & Mary win was the issues on special teams. And I also don't think in terms of a game plan, I don't think the Cavaliers, the staff was really looking to do a whole lot. They just kind of wanted to ride a handful of ideas through and kind of get to the win. Now, they did play efficiently. They didn't turn the ball over. Virginia had, before the William & Mary game, had turned it over for 42 straight games. So to have 2 games in a row where they haven't turned one over is like ridiculous. And they're also they've cut down on penalties. Last year, they really struggled with that. That they'd have 10, 11, 12 flags in a game. Right now they're leading the country, I think, in both turnovers and penalty yardage. So I mean that's a good thing for them going forward. I just think that those issues on offense, the offensive line is still relatively new to each other, and so they're good in pass block. They're really not good in run blocking, and I think that's got to be a thing that improves, and it has to start this weekend. Otherwise, they're looking at another another 2-10 season.
And so, yeah, let's break down the offense a little bit more here. UConn fans are actually quite familiar with quarterback Kurt Benkert. He transferred over from East Carolina, where he played against the Huskies in kind of a timeshare over there, and then was your starter last year. Can you give us kind of the 60-second scouting report of him as a quarterback and what the offense is like under him?
Yeah, so he was last year. He was a guy with a good arm, probably A+ arm talent. He was dealing with the knee brace that he had to wear from the injury that he had at ECU when he was still there, and then he also was he hurt his shoulder actually in the UConn game, and through the course of last season he just never was right. He came back in the summer when camp started, 15 pounds lighter. He had shed the knee brace. He looked a lot lighter on his feet, looked more comfortable in the offense. The first 2 weeks just haven't really borne that out. He starts a little rocky. He has moments where he can start to get it cooking a little bit, but consistency is a big problem for him. And decision making has been an issue as well. He still, even though technically Virginia didn't have any turnovers in the Indiana game, he had one possession where he both threw an interception that was called back because of a flag, and then was sacked, fumbled, and that was scooped and scored. That was then called back because of a penalty. So in essence, I think Brinkirk has a lot to still prove. He's better than what he's shown, but he's really got to get it together. And I wonder how much that is play calling, what the staff can really do to help him out.
Is there anyone pushing him for that starting job, or is he kind of definitely head and shoulders above the rest?
So the issue at quarterback for UVA is that they don't have one. I mean, realistically, there's Benkirk, right, at the top, and then there's a big gap in terms of junior, senior, sophomore, and then they have a true freshman, Lindell Stone, who literally just arrived this summer, who is technically their backup. They don't have a third option. Their third option is a kid named Devontae Cross, who came in as a quarterback, was moved to wide receiver. Has some wildcat packages installed for him, but now he's actually getting some burn at cornerback. So Bronco said this week that Cross will actually cross-train, and he actually will be a two-way player for them if needed. He is the primary backup both at the X wide receiver spot and the boundary corner spot, which it kind of blows my mind a little bit. But realistically, Benkirk's a guy, and I think that if they were in a situation where they had to play somebody quickly, I always thought it would be Cross, but maybe it would have to be Stone. The quarterback, they were expecting a grad transfer from Missouri, Marvin Zanders, to come in and be that guy, that backup, but then he didn't qualify academically, and then I think he was supposed to head to Vandy, but I don't think that ever panned out. So I'm not really sure what happened with him, and ultimately it just didn't work out for him at UVA. So quarterback wise, Benkirk's a guy regardless sort of what he does, and I'm wondering if maybe that is part of. I mean, I don't think it's intentional, but I wonder mentally, like, do you get complacent when you don't have anybody else pushing you? But there's certainly nobody else in line to be Virginia's quarterback at this point.
Well, UConn fans can certainly empathize with the search for a quarterback. I think we've probably been looking for a solid one since Dan Orlovsky back in 2004 was under center for us, honestly. So, and we actually just replaced our starting quarterback with kind of a retread of our own. So, always issues at the most important position on the field. What about the Virginia defense? It looks like that's a pretty stout group. Who are the players to keep an eye on there?
Well, the good thing about Virginia's defense is that they really there are a lot of options for the answer to that question. It's a situation, I think, where last year they had some injuries. They had to sort of ask guys to sort of step up into bigger roles. So they're starting outside linebacker at the Sam, had a heart condition, Malcolm Cook, and so he wasn't able to play. Tim Harris, as aforementioned, he injured his shoulder. He's got to sit out. So they had to lean on two freshmen last year. Bryce Hall, who was a really lightly recruited athlete, they put him at cornerback. And then Jordan Mack, who actually came to UVA last summer as a safety. So check this out. He arrives as a safety. He's moved to outside linebacker. Now he's at inside linebacker. And just blowing up. I mean, just putting up just like numbers. I believe in the Indiana game, I want to say he had double-digit tackles, if my memory is serving me correctly. Just a really talented kid who I think has really kind of caught on and found the right niche And certainly I think Bronco has done a good job already in his limited time that he's been in Charlottesville, really getting young kids ready to go on defense. He had a couple of them last year, both in Hall and Mack, as well as another kid who transferred out at the end of the year. But yeah, Jordan Mack had 16 tackles, a half a tackle for loss. He had 9 assists, 7 solo. He's had a really nice start to the season. But the names here are Micah Kaiser at linebacker and Quinn Blanding at safety. They're both multiple-time All-ACC players. They're certainly going to they're in line to do that again this year. Kaiser is nursing a little bit of a knee injury on his left leg. Something we saw him go down in the William & Mary game, came back with a knee brace, was wearing it still in media availability. He still puts together this monster game, 14 tackles, 2 sacks, and a pass breakup on the goal line on 4th and goal in the end zone that really gave them a chance to sort of come back when the game was still somewhat in question. Even though he's struggling on one bad wheel, Blanding is at safety is as reliable as they come. He had 12 tackles in the most recent game. He's a tackle machine. He and Kaiser both. So I think those two guys in the middle of the defense, and then Andrew Brown at defensive end. I think the UConn game last year was really his sort of coming out party. I think that was a game when people really realized that he was a former 5-star player who just hadn't caught on well. He finally was at a chance where he was getting some consistent playing time, and he really made the most of it early in the season. And then he hurt his shoulder, but he still kept playing and had a pretty good year. But now he's not just a guy who gets after the quarterback. He's actually doing a really good job, I think, of playing the run. So all of those guys, I think, are names you're gonna be familiar with. But this is a defense that has a lot of experience back, and it's pretty deep. I went into the season thinking Virginia could have a good defense. I left the last 2 games thinking they can have a great defense if they can keep Kaiser healthy enough to continue to play, and they don't have to turn to any young guys to fill that spot. I think they got a really good chance of being really good. And if that's the case, I think Virginia's going to be in a lot of games, and maybe they don't have any business being in, but certainly the defense I think is going to keep them in it.
Sure. Well, we're familiar with that blueprint as well. Typically have been a stronger defensive team than offensive, and in our opener against Holy Cross, certainly had some offensive struggles. So it will be interesting to see how they react to what sounds like a very strong defense. Is there a weakness that has emerged on that defense, or something that if you were UConn that you would attack on that Cavalier defense?
I think the one position that they had to figure out this year was nose tackle. Dante Wilkins was the nose tackle last year, and probably through the mismanagement of the previous staff, should have had a redshirt year available so he could come back this season, but he didn't. And so having exhausted his eligibility, UVA had to sort of put out a search, so to speak, and they moved defensive end Eli Ham back to defensive tackle. In a 3-4, though, I just don't know if you can have a 6'5", 300-pound guy at that position. You need more of a fire hydrant than you do that. I think as a group, the defensive line has a lot of talent. I just don't know how they fit in terms of the scheme. Now, what's been interesting over the first 2 games, is that you haven't seen a lot of base defense. Virginia's really comfortable playing out of the nickel, where I think even though they're somewhat thin at cornerback due to injuries and some guys who have left, overall I think they've got a lot of talent, and so they're able to kind of maximize it in that look. If there is a weakness, it's probably through the middle. I think both William & Mary and Indiana were able to run a little bit with their quarterback through the middle of the line, and that's probably one of the issues with the 3-4, right? Is that you only have one lineman that if you get him turned and get one more blocker on one of the linebackers inside, you're going to have some space. So I feel like that's going to be a big focal point, especially with Sheriff's back at quarterback for UConn. But certainly if there's a weakness on this defense, they got long cornerbacks who can run. They've got safeties with experience and pop. They've got linebackers who are athletic, who have gotten bigger, especially on the edges. They got Cook back, as well as a kid named Chris Peace, who I'm pretty sure folks are going to know a little bit about here in the next few weeks. But really, it's probably right in the heart of the line. I think that's the place where both William & Mary and Indiana attacked, and I think that's probably what you're going to see UConn do as well.
Interesting. So what is kind of the Virginia fan perception of having UConn come in? Obviously the Huskies are a program that have not been tremendously successful over the past few years, but did grab the win last year against UVA. Is the feeling that this should be a win, or have we kind of pushed that show me game to this week after the Indiana loss?
I'll be honest with you. I think that for a lot of fans who pay attention, that UConn game last year was one of the the marks in the maybe this Bronco thing won't work out column. It was by all accounts a winnable game for UVA. I think fans just really didn't like the way he sort of managed the end of the game. I think they were a little frustrated with you had an opportunity to kind of score, try to go for the win. And instead you tried to settle to set up a field goal from a kicker that, had never kicked in a game before that day. So I feel like that result last year has really stuck in the craw of a lot of fans. And certainly going into this game, Virginia is favored. Cavaliers aren't going to be favored many games this season. Like, that's just reality. I think folks are expecting to win, especially, you got a new coaching staff. You've got, you're talking about a team that has had played one game, couldn't play its second game, obviously, because of the hurricane. So it's been kind of sitting around for a while. Maybe they spent all that time, getting ready for UVA, but I doubt it. I just kind of feel like for fans, this is a must win in a lot of ways. It's not even really the show me game. That was a game where you thought, all right, well, if they lose and it's close and they've played well, then that'll be a good sign. This is if they lose, I'm not going to want to visit my message board for a day or so. I mean, this is just not going to be a good look for them. And that's no disrespect to UConn. I think it's just a question of the way perception works. And I think for fans, they saw that game last year and thought that's a game that Virginia should have won. If they thought their coach was any good, that they would have figured out a way to win it, even considering it's early in the season in his first year. But realistically, this one is different. The coaching change at UConn certainly plays into that. And I think for a lot of fans, if Virginia loses this game, they're going to check out for the rest of the season. There's no real way around it. That's just going to be the reality. So for the Cavaliers, this is a must win, in my opinion.
And so how do you see the matchup playing out?
Well, I would like to have seen a little bit more of UConn to this point, other than just the one game. Certainly they'll be well rested, but the situation at quarterback is kind of interesting to me because it seems like Randy Edsall and his staff wanted to go with David. They obviously tried and then, had to turn things over at halftime. Sheriffs is obviously going to be the guy this weekend. I don't think there was a whole lot last year about him that I would say is going to give Virginia problems. I think that Virginia defense is just at a really good spot right now. So my other question is going to be, what can they do offensively to sort of, to kind of play against this 3-3-5 stack. I mean, I think for the Cavaliers, it's going to come down to if they run the ball well, they win. Their defense is going to play well enough to keep them in it. Certainly the tempo aspect that they just faced against Indiana is not going to be on the table here. I think you're going to see UConn try to control the ball and do a lot of what kind of fits their personnel. I'm interested to see some of the matchups between whether it's Virginia's defensive line against UConn's offensive line, or especially Virginia's run game against that front six. I don't know how to say is it Fatuxi? How do you say that?
Fatukasi.
Okay, there you go. That dude. I'm really interested to see him again. I just feel like, UConn still has some solid, guys on defense. Obviously Jamar Summers being one of them. So I'm really interested to see if Virginia's offense can get it going. I just feel like right now Virginia's the more talented team, and typically that's the team that wins. And the weirdness of the schedule, I'm not sure what role that plays, but it certainly could have an impact. I just feel like the Cavaliers, like I said, this is a must win for them, and I feel like they're gonna get it done. But it's not going to be an easy one, and I think for a lot of fans, that part in and of itself is probably going to frustrate them some.
Yeah, I mean, I am actually, I think you may recall from our Q&A that we exchanged, I kind of agree. I think Virginia is going to have the edge in this one, but I do think UConn covers that 9-point point spread.
That's a lot of points.
Yeah, I will say that.
That's a lot of points.
Well, we're going to end things here with a little bit more of a fun note. There actually should be a decent UConn contingent in Charlottesville for this game. Curious if you have any recommendations for a good place for a post-game meal or beverage.
Well, the corner is always a good option. It's not terribly close to the stadium, but typically, if you're walking back to where you parked across the way at JPJ and U-Haul, the basketball stadiums, current and old, respectively, you can get down to the corner pretty easily. There are a lot of different restaurants and bars and things in that area. My favorite is the Virginian. It's a little hole in the wall, great sandwiches, great atmosphere. It kind of feels like your quintessential college place to grab a meal. So I would say go down the corner. Can't really go wrong with anything going on down there. Just make sure that you mind your P's and Q's. Charlottesville police they're not really taking any mess right now.
Sure thing. Well, thank you very much for your time and for the recommendations. Appreciate it, and good luck on Saturday.
Appreciate it, man. Glad to be with you guys. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Bye.